Welcome to the sportsvirus.com podcast and videocast. And we have a very special guest today to lead us off in our venture here as we sort of test this out and see if people will check out what we have going on the sportsvirus.com Facebook page. And joining us now, our first ever guest in this venture, and joining us also on the podcast, which has been going on for a decade now, believe it or not, Bruce McGowan from KCBS Radio, former talk show host at KMBR. We're both talking to you from Marin County, two different locations. My brother, Tom Castellano, is directing this. Bruce, how are you? What's going on? How are you doing going through all this coronavirus stuff? Are you hanging in there?
Oh, yeah. I got in a little surf action yesterday, but now we're told that all the beaches, all the open space where I like to hike, everything has been shut down because all of these people from the East Bay and San Francisco came over and crowded our areas, and we're not practicing, the safe staying away from each other 6 feet. And so the park rangers got all upset, and they went to the county health, and the county health shut everything down. Literally, I mean, we have all this national recreation area, we have national parks, we have state parks, we have water district lands, we got open space lands, all shut down. I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck in the house. It's driving me nuts. And on top of that,
it really is. Yeah, it's driving everybody crazy.
Yeah.
But one good thing is that you could work from home, and that's the thing. KCBS has been a great resource for people as far as the news, and to be able to work from home for KCBS, I would think that's a nice advantage, and I would think that the ratings are pretty high for KCBS right now.
Oh yeah, no question. KCBS has been doing a great job. I've been listening to their updates throughout the last week, and you get more local information there than you're going to get anywhere on any, immediately, in terms of getting it immediately, than you're going to get on any other platform or any other media outlets. So I feel very proud to be a part of it. And, what we're doing at KCBS with sports, I mean, we're just, kind of there to sort of provide a little relief, but there's not really a whole lot to talk about, nothing really going on. So we have to kind of be creative. We're going to do short updates and just kind of keep it simple, and let the news folks kind of, do what they do. And hopefully this virus mess will abate in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be able to get back to business as usual. But I'm not real optimistic in that department, Joe.
Well, I was thinking that the only sports news that really has come out in the last week has been NFL news. Everything else is bad news, something being suspended or canceled, an event being canceled or suspended. So outside of Tom Brady going to the Buccaneers or DeForest Buckner getting traded to the Colts, outside of that, I mean, I would think that it's pretty hard to come up with good sports stories right now.
It is. I mean, you have to be creative. One of the things I think we might try to do is do a little archiving, go back into time and find either, look at something that happened on this date in sports history. That might be interesting. Tell a little story for a minute, or maybe do just, a sports memory. I've been able to cover a lot of big sports events over the last 40 some odd years. And, maybe I could lend a little personal aside to it. I'm not sure how we're going to do this. It's kind of interesting and fun. Doing it from your house is one thing. That's something I've never done. And then coming up with some unusual ideas takes a little creative effort. But, overall, I think this is going to be fairly easy. But we do have to be, we can't just sit there and say, well, there's nothing going on. Tom Brady signed. That's about the only news. I mean, there are all sorts of little stories going on, and you just have to kind of, go to websites and come up with your own ideas. And so that's what we'll do. We got no choice.
Yeah, I heard Steve Bitker earlier today, one of your colleagues over there at KCBS, and he was playing some play-by-play calls. At least he played one of Josh Lewin, who's now one of the Red Sox announcers, and he was describing eating ice cream. He's doing some play-by-play. Joe Buck has done something at home, too. I think he was doing some play-by-play of his kid crying. I mean, some of these sportscasters are getting bored now.
Joe, I don't know what you've been doing with your sports virus. How you've been what have you been doing? How have you been managing to get through this thing? What have you been talking about?
Well, last week we had Jeremy Affold on, and I definitely encourage people to go back and listen to that. Click on the link on thesportsvirus.com. Affold was great, told a lot of stories from the World Series years. You know what I did yesterday, Bruce? I watched Game 6 and Game 7 of the 1986 World Series on YouTube, and I couldn't have been more entertained. I mean, those were great games, and I didn't remember every detail. So I watched the entire game of each
That's
game,
great.
and it was so much fun. It was
Can I
fun.
tell you a little story about that? My own personal experience with that series, and if those of you younger viewers and listeners don't remember, that was the year that the Mets came back from a 3-2 deficit and won the last 2 games in New York. And people forget there was a rainout between Game 6 and Game 7. I have a friend of mine who lives in New York who's a big Yankee fan, and I was back visiting him, and we were up in the New Hampshire, Vermont area hiking around Mount Washington. This is in October of 1986. And the night of the 6th game, we were staying in a hotel. We're watching the game. He was rooting for the Yankees. I was rooting for I'm sorry. He was rooting for the Yankees. I was rooting for the who was it again playing?
No,
The Mets. I'm sorry.
Mets. Red Sox,
He was rooting for the Mets, and I was I'm getting confused here. And I was rooting for the Red Sox. Just because Boston hadn't been to a World Series and won it all since what was it, 1917. So when Mookie Wilson's ground ball went right through the legs of Bill Buckner to win the game, he gets down on his knees and his feet are up there, his hands are up in the air. He's going, yeah, yeah, yeah. And next door, there was a bunch of young guys watching television also. They started banging on the walls, and you could hear furniture breaking and people screaming obscenities. And the manager of the hotel came in and threw them out. Well, so 2 nights later, we're in Providence, Rhode Island, and we decide, go out, get a bite to eat. We go to the sports bar, and there's only 8 guys at the sports bar, and they're all sitting looking real gloomily at the TVs that are up in the corner. And I said, well, you guys have a chance to win the World Series tonight. And they all looked at me, 2 or 3 of them looked at me and said, it's not going to happen. They're not going to win. And you'll remember in that game, I think the Red Sox took a 2-0 lead early.
3-0.
hit 3-0 lead. And Ray Knight hit the big home run late in the game. And all these guys, they didn't get upset. They just said, we told you. We told you.
That was amazing,
was
watching that. Yeah, realizing how did the Mets win? I mean, you think about Roger Clemens was pitching a no-hitter in the middle innings in Game 6. Yeah. I didn't remember that. Bruce Hurst was pitching a 1-hitter in the middle innings for the Red Sox in Game 7. So you just wonder, how did they blow that?
Well, the Mets that year had a great team. I mean, the Red Sox had a great team, but you remember the Mets, they had, of course, we mentioned Ray Knight. They had who's that? That's my daughter, by the way. Hi, Molly. She's
this never would have happened without Molly. So thank you, Molly.
That's right. Molly helped to set it up, and now she's giving you the evil eye. Don't worry, she's not a demon shot. Now she's running. She's watching Big on television. She's also confined to the house. She's missing school.
Are you on TV?
I'm on TV live, sweetie. Actually,
let's tell a quick story about Molly, by the way.
Yeah.
So when Molly was born, you had to rush to the hospital. Molly was being born, and I was filling in for you on KMBR on the postgame show. So there's a whole parallel right here.
There it is. That's right. That was, I believe, the Washington Nationals were in town because I was supposed to do an interview the day Molly was born with Frank Robinson. And I remember running into him years later, and I said, Frank, I want to apologize to you rather belatedly. We weren't able to do the interview that day. And he goes, what interview? I don't remember anything. And I thought, okay, of course he doesn't remember anything. It was 4 years ago. How many interviews has he done over the years? So Molly is back there, as you can see, and her little friend Amber is hiding behind the scenes. They're just hanging out today. They have nothing to do. High school is, they're both freshmen in high school. They can't go to school. So they're stuck at home with me and my wife. So you're giving me a little relief here, Joe.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is just some of your memories. I mean, you have so many stories to tell about the San Francisco Giants and the years that you covered them for KMBR. And I have a few as well that we could sort of share together. I think the one player that stands out, and he was recently in the news because he's upset about not getting into the Hall of Fame, and that's Barry Bonds. I don't know if he will get in, but man, he was quite a character because I think both you and I saw sort of the best and the worst of him. When I was working with SiriusXM, I saw both sides, and I'm sure you did as well.
Oh, yeah. The thing about Barry Bonds is, I traveled a lot with the Giants, and so Bonds was a little easier to deal with because he knew I was not going to, I was one of the regular guys. They say that sometimes familiarity breeds contempt. There's a certain amount of truth to that. But, hey, girls, I think get back to they're watching Big on TV. I think that's better for them than to distract us. No, but Bonds, I never had a problem with. The only time I ever had a problem with, our friend Barry Bloom, the sports writer, who now works for Forbes, was doing an interview with him. I think Barry was with MLB.com at the time. And we're down in San Diego or someplace. And Barry was doing an interview. I didn't realize they were doing a one-on-one interview because he was just sitting there chatting with him. And I come over and, sort of tried to get in on the action. And Barry looks at me and goes, hey, we're doing an interview. Go away. that's the worst, I ever got treated. I saw him being very, I hate to use the word abrasive, but just dismissive, I guess, a better word to use, towards a number of reporters. And that just, Barry was kind of hot and cold. I think he was just a moody guy. If you remember his dad, Bobby, I got to know Bobby really well when he was coaching. He was Dusty Baker's friend, but he was also kind of a troubled soul. And Barry had a very complicated relationship with him. They actually patched up a lot of their differences when Bobby became the head coach. And it was very moving when Bobby was dying of cancer. You remember Barry was right. I think he was either breaking Hank Aaron's all-time record. He was very close to breaking it. And he hit a home run the day before Bobby showed up to the ballpark, and the day after. And they brought Bobby in. I'll never forget this, Joe. They brought Bobby in on a stretcher because he was, in hospice kind of care, but he wanted to see his son play. And Barry didn't hit a home run that night, but Bobby was in the press box, I think he was in Willie McCovey's booth upstairs, and they had a shot of him. They propped him up, and he waved, and the crowd went crazy. And Barry Bonds, of course, had tears in his eyes and was talking about it after the game. So that, was one of the great moments, I think, poignant moments, not great moments, but poignant moments regarding Barry Bonds. He was a complicated character. I think Dusty Baker had a difficult time with him sometimes, but Dusty had known him since he was a kid, and Barry was very respectful of Dusty and never gave Dusty any trouble. Different story with Jeff Kent. I know not to digress, but I got a great little story about Jeff Kent. One time I go into the clubhouse. One time I go to the clubhouse, and this is before a game, and I'm trying to, hustle up some interviews before I think the game was shown. I'd already gone to the visitors' locker room or clubhouse and gotten a few interviews. So I go to the Giants clubhouse, and it was always tougher to get interviews with the Giants before the game because usually out on the field early, and they just didn't do that many, and the visitors were always available because they're just, they got nothing to do. They're not, they're far away from home, and so they're easy to deal with. So Ken is in the clubhouse all by himself. Everybody else is on the field. I think, oh, this is great. I can get a one-on-one with Jeff Kent. He's got his uniform on, and he's fiddling around in the locker room for something. He's got a bat, and he's, got a full uniform on. He's getting ready to head out there. I said, hey, Jeff, before you go out for batting practice, you got a few minutes for me, And he turns around and gives me this little sneer, and he goes, I don't do interviews for the game, sir. And I laughed, and I said, Jeff, you know me. We've known each other 6 years. You don't need to call me sir. Call me Bruce. He goes, I call you Bruce? He says, I'd rather call you, I won't use the words, but ass, whatever, SHITHEAD and F, all these different things. I said, actually, Jeff, Bruce would be just fine. He goes, I thought so. Now, would you please get away, sir? I got to get out to the field and do some batting practice. That was Jeff Kent. He was a piece of work, that guy. That was a fun team to cover on the field, but off the field, some of the things that went on. And Dusty confided in me once during the playoffs of 2002, and I can talk about that. He actually invited me into his room after they had won the division series against Atlanta. We're in St. Louis real late at night, and he just went off on a tangent about all the things he didn't like that were going on. And he says, I'm tired of it. This was after 10 years of the Giants. I said, but Dusty, you guys just won your first playoff series, since 1989. I said, this is a big deal. And he goes, I don't care. It's all been ruined by all this nonsense. And I thought to myself, he's not going to be around next year. And I made the mistake of telling Ralph Barbieri over breakfast the next day, it's good. I'm going to use it on my show. And I said, no, you're not. Because Dusty didn't ask me to keep this in confidence, but I know he would not have wanted me to go blabbing it on the air. And I didn't. And Ralph says, we got an exclusive here. And I said, Ralph, you know as well as I that certain times you don't betray the trust of people that you're working with. And Dusty was such a good friend of mine. I was not about to do that. I told Dusty years later about that, and he laughed. He says, you probably could have used it. I wouldn't have gotten upset. I was out of there anyway. So,
well,
thanks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that whole dynamic between Bonds and Kent. And I think Barry, on a good day, you could talk to him off mic. He would tell stories, and you could talk to him. But he was really reluctant, especially when I was dealing with him during the home run chase, really reluctant to do a one-on-one interview. In fact, I've told the story before about how he promised an interview when I was on Sirius XM. He promised an interview after he broke the record. And then we were led to believe all the way until the day that he broke it, that night, that he would be doing the interview the next day. And I went up to him and he said, I ain't doing no XM radio interview. And when I said, why? He said, oh, because they wouldn't give us, they wouldn't give me a free XM for life. He had wanted free XM for life. And it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And then, so that was
like
it.
He really needed a free, like he really couldn't pay for it. Yeah.
Exactly.
His salary. Well, he just was making an excuse. That's the thing about athletes. Sometimes I hate to sound like an old jaded reporter, but you really, they limit the access to athletes now. I won't say which team did this, but I was in a locker room of a team after a game, and I was talking to a player, and a PR guy comes over to me, starts tapping on my shoulder. And I said, excuse me, I'm doing an interview with this guy. It wasn't, a one-on-one kind of interview where I had to have it not interrupted, but I was getting some post-game sound. And he goes, well, you can't talk to this guy. I said, why can't I talk to him? And the athlete said, no, it's okay. He goes, well, if you want to get an interview, you got to go in the interview room. And I said, well, he's not coming into the interview room. And I got into this whole argument with the guy, and I said, I'm doing the interview. I did the interview, and he comes up to me afterwards, you can't do that anymore, And I said, well, that's ridiculous. I'm trying to help you and your team out, and you're limiting access to me. You're doing just the opposite of your job. And he got all mad at me and did, tell me what my job consists of. I just thought, okay, you're not going to win this battle, so just shut the hell and go somewhere else, which is what I did. And the next day, the guy comes up to me and apologizes. He said, I was just having a rough day, and I didn't mean to make you the object of my scorn. And I said, don't worry about it, man. The whole thing was forgotten. But, players are tougher to deal with these days. They just are,
Well, I think also there's so much media attention, so many more media members, and it's a daily game. So, the daily grind kind of gets to them. And there's human beings. I mean, they're going to be moody where one day it might be okay to do an interview. And then the next day you might run into somebody. I know I did when I was with SiriusXM. I was in that clubhouse a lot more than I am now. And I would have players, not necessarily Giants. I'm talking about all different players around Major League Baseball that I would try to talk to. And some of them would just literally yell at me. No, I'm not doing it. It was a really a rude awakening to me as to some of the personalities that were out there. But most of the guys are good. And some guys, even when they had a bad reaction, they'd come back over to me and say, I'm sorry. I was in a bad mood. Let's do it now. Let's do the interview. So most guys are pretty cool.
Yeah, the only guy that I really had problems with, Joe, over the years was Kirk Gibson. And he had problems with everybody, especially radio people. And I'll never forget, I was doing an interview with Chet Lemon, great guy. This is back in 84, I believe, when the Tigers won the World Series. It might have been even earlier. Gibson was kind of unknown at that time. He might have been a rookie, might have been in his second year. It was before he came up with all those postseason heroics with the Tigers and later with the Dodgers. Anyway, I'm interviewing Chet Lemon in an almost empty White Sox clubhouse. Most of the guys were out on the field stretching, and he happened to be there and said he'd do the interview. Just a sweetheart of a guy. So we're halfway through the interview. All of a sudden, across the room, this guy he looks like he'd been in the shower. His hair's going every which way. He's got this wild eyes and 5 o'clock shadow. He screamed, "What the hell are you doing here? Get out of this locker room!" And I didn't know if he was talking to me, and apparently he was talking to me. And then he disappeared, and I said, Chet, I stopped the tape recorder. I said, Chet, who the heck was that? He goes, oh, that's Kurt Gibson. He's just one of our younger players. He's wound a little tight. Don't pay any attention to him. So after the game that day, Gibson had gotten the game-winning hit, and there's a whole bunch of reporters around him. He's a very bright guy. So I stick my microphone in the group, and he swats it away. Hey, get that thing out of my face! Get it out of my face! He used the foul language. And from that point on, every time the Tigers would come to town, and every time I tried to talk to him, he goes, "I'm not talking to you, you son of," And then later, he is playing with the Dodgers, and I go down. Remember the home run he hit? And he's in the clubhouse, and I didn't go to the interview room to get him. I wanted to get the clubhouse because I wanted to ask 3 or 4. And he couldn't have been nicer. And then he calls me one time. I'm down in Atlanta with the Giants, and I'm on the bus going to the ballpark for Game 5. And I have this producer calling me. I say, "Hey, this is so-and-so for Kirk Gibson's radio show." And I didn't even know he had a radio show. This is after he retired. He said, "Kirk wants to have you on to do an interview." And Kirk didn't know me from Adam. He just knew, the producer knew that I was covering the Giants. So we do the interview, and Kirk's asking all these good questions. Very smart guy. And then at the end of the interview, I said, "Kirk, you don't remember this, but you used to treat me like I was some kind of a pariah, and you yelled at me and did all these things. So I think it's only appropriate that when you say goodbye to me, just say, 'Get the hell out of here.'" So he laughs and he goes, "Get the hell out of here."
That's great.
Yeah.
No, what you should have said to him was, "In a season that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened." You did it like Vin Scully. Yeah, the 88 home run.
You know who had the best call of that, though? Wasn't Jack Buck, wasn't Vin Scully. It was Bill King. And if you listen, I've got Bill
Oh,
King's
I
call
haven't
about
heard. I don't know
somebody.
if I've heard that.
Oh, it's great. You know what he says? He goes, Eckersley, the last pitch you might remember that Eckersley threw that Gibson hit was a backdoor slider, which, breaks in on the hitter and down. And that was Eckersley's money pitch, and he hadn't thrown it. So King is, almost prescient. He says, Eckersley is not going to that backdoor slider. Here it comes. Fly ball, deep right field, gone. The Dodgers have won it. You wouldn't have known that he was broadcasting for the A's. He made it sound so dramatic and so
Wow.
exciting. Bill King, I remember, did that for the Franco Harris catch. I was taping that while watching it on TV. I was a 20-year-old student at the University of Denver, and Bill's call was just, it was wonderful. I mean, he had that ability to transcend. He was a fan, but he wasn't a homer. He'd get excited when the home team won, but when the visiting team did something, or the opposite team did something that was special, he would really, make it exciting. And I love Bill King for that reason, among others. And not too many announcers do that, unfortunately, today. You listen to the guy in St. Louis, Mike Shannon. I was listening to the playoffs this year. There's a fly ball out in right field. That ball's going to go up into the corner, into the gap, and 2 runs are going to score, and the Astros are just taking the lead. And I was thinking, come on. Or Ed Farmer in Chicago, fly ball deep left field, it's gone, home run. Tigers lead 12-2. But that's
one of the big differences too, Bruce, is that in those days that you're talking about, the Bill King days, or even what I was talking about with Vin Scully in the 1986 World Series, is the ability to lay out and let the pictures tell the story, or even on the radio, let the audio tell the story. When the Mets won that Game 6, when Knight scored, and Vin Scully said, "Here comes Knight," and the Mets win it, he doesn't say anything again for like about a minute and a half.
Yeah.
I mean, he just let the pictures tell the story.
In television, you don't need to do that. In radio, you do. I mean, you don't have to fill all the time. You can let the crowd make some noise. But in radio, you have to create the word pictures. All you have is your voice and your account of things. And that's one of the reasons Bill told me years ago. He said, I hate television because I'm kind of not really necessary. They could have a broadcast without me, which they did that, Joe, back in the early 80s. They had an entire broadcast on television. They experimented with no announcers. And between innings, I think it was Greg Gumbel came on, or Bryant Gumbel came on and explained what was going on. They never did another one, but it was interesting. You really didn't need the announcers other than just, to give you stats, because you could see everything that was going on. Radio is a different story. Yeah. That's why I think that's one of the reasons why you and I love radio so much, is that we get to tell stories, and kind of, it's an egotistical thing, let's face it, but it's fun in that respect. You really have to be on your toes, and you have to, think quickly. Television, the best announcers to me are on the radio. They don't get paid as well as the TV guys. They don't get as much recognition, but they're still the best in the business.
All right, before we finish up, just real quick on this season's Giants, if there is a baseball season, which I really hope we get it underway at some point. But, wow, what a big change from Bruce Bochy to Gabe Kapler.
Yeah.
It's going to be completely different, a lot more analytics, a lot more, I think, micromanaging. From what I think, just from seeing what happened. And, Bruce, I started a little bit of a firestorm when I tweeted out that interview that John Miller and Sean Estes were doing during the game with Gabe Kapler, and he just kind of took his headset off. He was polite about it, but he took his headset off saying, "Hey, I got to go, guys. I got to set my defense." And I just thought that was wrong to cut off an interview in the middle of it like that. So I sent out a tweet. It got a little bit of attention. So I'm not saying that I dislike Gabe Kapler. I think he seems like he'll be a good manager, but I think he's going to have to loosen up a little bit. He just seems like he's pretty tight. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my impression of him as a player, and I only dealt with him a few times as a player and as manager, is that he's pretty loose. A lot of the criticism I've heard is that he allowed the Phillies to kind of have, let the players do whatever they wanted. There was really no discipline, no feeling that, he was in charge. And I think that might have been partially due to the fact that he was a former player and felt that the players should, police themselves. I think you got to give the guy a year or two before you make a judgment on how good of a manager he is, because he hasn't been given much of a good hand to work with. I mean, the Giants are a shadow of what they have been, and their minor league system isn't really ready to kick in yet. They've got some good players, so he's not going to have as much to deal with, or as much, to work with, as he had in Philly. From what I hear in Philadelphia, this is from a few friends of mine who cover the Phillies, is that, he didn't have the pitching that he needed. They had enough hitting, but they didn't have enough pitching. And also the players, it's not that like they didn't like him, but they just didn't respect him a lot. So hopefully he learned something. He is an interesting guy. I've never heard of a manager who's such a into bodybuilding. I mean, if you see this guy, he looks like he's, Charles Atlas or something. Nice guy, though. Very, very bright. His parents worked in the civil rights movement. They were lawyers. He's well-read. He understands baseball history. I don't know if he's going to make a good manager or not. Seems like a nice guy, though. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe he was just trying to compensate a little bit for what he had going on in Philly. Like you said, maybe he was a little too loose there, so he wants to be a little tighter. He's doing that interview, and he felt like, hey, I got to be on top of things here a little bit more, especially early on. I mean, it's hard when you take on a new job like that. There's a lot of pressure and stress, and you're just, not really familiar with the surroundings. You want to impress everybody right away. So you know that he's been put in kind of a difficult position right off the bat, especially with a roster, like you said. I mean, there's not a lot there. It's a lot of younger players, and this team is going to have to rebuild for a while.
No question. And I think one of the things that's going to help him a little bit, as I mentioned, I think people are going to give him a little rope because this team has not been good for a couple of years. And on paper, they're worse than they have been, losing Bumgarner, having guys like Posey and Crawford and Longoria and Belt, into their 30s. Their outfield is not set. The biggest name they brought in was Wilmer Flores, who's a good player, but nothing, that's going to knock your socks off. The bullpen is a big question mark. Can Mike Yastrzemski, who had a great year last year as a 28, 29-year-old rookie, duplicate what he did? I mean, there's a lot of questions, and they're not supposed to do a whole lot. So hopefully with the expectations being low, he'll be given some slack. But as far as the Giants are, the Giants are outside of the Dodgers. I mean, who is really very good in that division? With a little luck, if they get career years out of some people that haven't done a whole lot, and some of these rookies kick in, and Alex Dickerson stays healthy, they might actually be able to finish as high as second. I'm not saying they will, but stranger things have happened, Joe. We've seen it.
Yeah. Well, Madison Bumgarner is going to be in a Diamondbacks uniform. That's a strange.
I didn't like that.
Yeah.
I didn't like that move at all. I understand it because the Giants are moving ahead. And I understand Bumgarner wanted to play for a contender because Arizona looks good. But you build around a guy like Bumgarner. He not only sets the tone on the field, but in that clubhouse, I understand why the Giants did it. They wanted to save money.
I want to say thanks a lot for coming on. We really appreciate it. And we'll do more of this. Hopefully it'll be a baseball season and we'll be able to actually talk about some real baseball.
There you go. All right, Joe. Thanks, man.
Well, thanks to Bruce McGowan from KCBS in San Francisco. And we hope to get many more guests. And we really appreciate you watching here and listening to the podcast on the sportsvirus.com, the Inside China Basin Giants baseball podcast, which go on once per week. And I want to thank our sponsors. Sunfirst Solar is our sponsor that is returning to us. And you can contact them at 415-458-5870 for your residential solar system needs. Also, TPC Harding Park. They have been our longtime sponsor on all of our podcasts. Right now, they are closed. We'll get more information for you on when the course opens up again, and also the PGA Championship, which has been postponed. And Kane's Tire, they're open. Kane's Tire in San Rafael is open. So if you have any car needs and you need to get some new tires on your car, go to Kane's Tire in San Rafael. For now, I'm Joe Castellano. Thanks for watching this special webcast. And we'll be back with you again soon here on the sportsvirus.com.